Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am Sharon Green Middleton, Vice President of the City Council, representing the 6th District. I also serve as Chairwoman of the Economic and Community Development Committee. We are here this afternoon for the following, all at 2 p.m., and that's Bill number 21-0037R, Bill number 21-0078, and Bill number 21-0097. And in attendance today, we have the members of the committee first, and John Bullock of the 9th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Councilman Mark Conway of the 4th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Councilman Ryan Dorsey of the 3rd District. Councilman Ryan Dorsey of the 3rd District. We'll go back.
Hello, thank you.
You're welcome. Councilman Antonio Glover of the 13th District.
Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Councilwoman Odette Ramos of the 14th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, thank you. And Councilman Robert Stokes of the 12th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I don't see any other council members present. Members of the Office of the President, Nikki Thompson,
Madam Chair.
welcome. Matt Stegman, are you here? Don't see Matt, or Aaron is not here to graph and read. Represent, and Lucy Font. Is Lucy Font here?
Thank you,
Don't see
Madam
Lucy.
Chair.
Oh, hi, Lucy.
I'm here. How are you?
Okay. And representing the mayor's office, Nina Thimulis.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. And Natasha Mihu.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that if you are not speaking, to please keep yourself on mute. Please do not take yourself off of mute unless you are recognized by the chair. When recognized, please identify yourself and the agency or organization that you represent. Once you have finished speaking, please put yourself back on mute. And let's begin. Several representatives who plan to testify today have other scheduled events. So, and this happens to be, I know people that are from the agencies that are representing for bill number 21-0097. So we're going to begin with the Emergency Security Deposit Relief Act. And this bill was introduced on June 8th, 2021, and Councilwoman Middleton, myself, is the sponsor of this bill. And I just want to mention as well that this bill was introduced before the mayor announced his security deposit initiative. So between that time and the today of this bill, that we have had some great dialogue between the initiative and this act, and we're just going to get a little bit of feedback from one of the agency heads in particular that is going to be basically in charge of this initiative that the mayor had presented. And like I said, we had some great dialogue. I think we're going to really work together and get really something solid dealing with security deposits in our city. And these are things that are, focused around the actual funding and and I'm pretty excited that everyone is basically on the same page with this. But I will read the purpose of what the Emergency Security Deposit Relief Act is all about. So the purpose of establishing the Emergency Security Deposit Voucher Program, placing a cap on the amount of money the program can give each family for a security deposit, providing for a certain funding, setting forth the eligibility requirements, requiring that the Department of Housing and Community Development adopt rules and regulations to administer the program, establishing procedures on a family's admission into the program, putting certain priorities in place for distribution of security deposit vouchers, requiring the vouchers to be used within a certain time frame, making a family liable for the cost of the voucher upon a finding that the family has used the voucher improperly, providing for an appeals process, defining certain terms, and providing for termination of the subtitle on a certain date. And again, this bill was introduced on June 8th. So what we're going to do is now the committee will now hear from agencies, and we'll go ahead and start with the city solicitor in their office.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Elena DePietro from the Law Department. How
Hi,
are you?
Elena.
Hello. So, we reviewed this bill based on we did not know about the initiative and the other discussions. So I'm not sure that our concerns are relevant still, but we just had a few things that we probably need to tweak about it to make it approvable for form and legal sufficiency. The first one was that the eligibility requirements in the bill require that a family be low income, which is a certain definition in this bill, whereas the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has a requirement that the money grants made through the fund only go to very low income households. So I know there are some specific definitions related to those phrases. We just have to make sure that any disbursements from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund are consistent with that fund's requirements. Secondly, there was another requirement related to disbursement from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that was that that the minimum affordability period would be at least for 30 years. And I don't know how that jives with the type of grants that are being given for security deposits under this act. Let's see. I want to make sure there was nothing else. The other thing that was a little bit of concern was what happens to the security deposit monies that are given out through this program, and then the tenant moves on at the end of their tenancy, and the landlord returns their funds. There's nothing that talks about what happens to those funds. Are they required to give them back to the program for use for somebody else, or can they use those again if they're still eligible for the program? So that I'm sure can be easily cleared up, but we just have to know what the right answer is to that. Let's see if that's anything else in here. I think that covers it. Those are really things that need to be amended if we're going to move forward with the bill, because they're really not, they're substantive issues that can't be done via rule and regulation. So that's the Law Department's report. If we can solve those problems, we will be happy to approve it for form and legal sufficiency.
Thank you. And I think there's going to be a lot of problems we're going to resolve. That's why I want to go ahead and have Ms. Tisha Edwards come on next, because I know she has another obligation. And I thank you, Ms. Edwards, for joining in on this hearing.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Appreciate you giving our office an opportunity to participate in this dialogue, and also want to acknowledge you and your leadership around this really important issue, which is making security deposits accessible to families who are seeking housing stability, especially as a result of so many families who are being negatively impacted by COVID-19. So the first thing I'd just like to say is, as you mentioned, Councilwoman, the mayor did announce a security deposit initiative that will begin in September. And so what we want to continue to do is have a dialogue with the council to make sure that these programs are in alignment, and that we can access some of the existing resources that the city already has available. I think the bill initially mentioned the Housing Affordable Trust Fund as a potential funding source. We would recommend that we want, kind of one rental assistance program that the council endorses and supports, that the mayor endorses and supports, and that has a viable funding stream. And we have received significant resources from the federal and state government that is time sensitive. And so, as we've said previously, we would really like to see the security deposit initiative draw down on some of those federal resources before we go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I think that's a second tier funding source when we start thinking about sustainability. But initially, we would highly recommend that we use some of the existing federal and state resources so that we don't have to give that money back to the federal government. We agree that this is a really important issue. I'd like to echo the sentiment of the law department. One of the big things that we need to work from a policy perspective is we don't want the security deposit to be considered income for the tenant. So we've done a lot of our housing stability work directly working with the landlord so that it does not adversely impact the tenant's income. And we do need to think through further what happens to a security deposit when you change residences. And so we need to work with the legal department and the council on those specific matters. But we are in agreement that we need to have a robust security deposit program. We think we have a starting place with what was launched last week and is scheduled to begin in September. And we just hope that this legislation will be complementary to that, not duplicative, and allows us to quickly move into implementation. But I'm so glad that the council is continuing to bring this up as a critical issue for our community.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Does the committee have any questions at this time? And I did mention we are, I think it's best if we do schedule a work session. So we're definitely not going to vote on this today. You had mentioned a
Yes.
time frame from September to September, and I know originally we were still working with the July 1 time frame. So
Yes.
things have changed, and we're definitely in agreement with using our federal money that is coming first. So excited about that. So I'm feeling we're definitely on the same page with this.
Okay.
And again, I appreciate you sharing your comments. We're now going to go ahead with the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephanie Murdoch, Legislative Liaison for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm also joined here today by Acting Commissioner Alice Kennedy. DHCD supports City Council Bill 210097, the intent of this bill, and we recognize that the security deposit represents a barrier for low-income residents in the city. But we do have a number of concerns which we've laid out in our bill report. As you mentioned, as the sponsor mentioned, she is working in coordination with the mayor's office and who's recently announced security deposit plan to try to align those two programs. So many of the concerns that are detailed in our bill report were already mentioned by the law department and by Ms. Edwards, so I don't want to belabor them, but just to highlight a few. The source of funding for the program is a concern. We certainly support the use of the federal funds and a further conversation around use of affordable housing trust funds, which are tied to specific parameters. We also recommend that the bill be amended to allow for payments to be made directly to the landlord on behalf of the tenant, which is something Ms. Edwards mentioned as well. This is a two-party check system that may be able to prevent misuse of the funds. Additionally, we would recommend requiring an amendment that the rental properties be licensed and registered with the Baltimore City Department of Housing and Community Development. We'd also like to have additional conversation around the time period for which the families can use the funding and request an extension, and add a requirement to the bill that if a family is going to request an extension, they would give us at least 15 days prior written notice. The law department did raise the concern around the parameters for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the range, the AMI range in which they can be used for. So for those folks that are in that 50 to 60% AMI subset, additional funding outside of the AHHTF would have to be used. So just to wrap up, DHCD supports the intent of this legislation. We do have some concerns around the implementation, but we look forward to working with the sponsor and with other agencies to try to align these programs and address some of the concerns laid out in our bill report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your comments, and looking forward to working with your team and Alice Kennedy as well. Any questions thus far from the committee? And then moving on to Department of Finance.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Pedro Aponte, Assistant Budget Director on the revenue side. As the bill is proposed, we feel that we don't support entirely as a structure. We believe there are certain items that have been explained previously, and we look forward for a work session. There are our concerns specifically the use of funding on the general fund. We want to make sure that's either federal funding first, and if entirely funded by Affordable Housing Trust Fund if the federal funding is not sufficient. But we want to make sure the general fund is in touch for moving forward with this program. And I'm happy to answer any question you might have.
Thank you. And yes, the flow of funding and where the funding starts is definitely a very important piece, and looking forward to working with you so we can also, so we're all on the same page. Now we're going to see if there's any public testimony on this bill. We're going to check for with computer users at first. Please use your raise hand function if you wish to testify. When called upon, please state your name before testifying. Attendees who call in will be unmuted one by one. Callers will hear 2 beeps when unmuted. If you do not wish to testify, please say so when you are unmuted. If you do wish to testify, please state your name. Are any hands raised? And I see one. And Mika, yes, you would like to testify? You're unmuted.
I'm actually wanting to testify for 210037R, not this bill.
Okay. Okay. You can put your hand raised down. Thank you. Any other hands raised? Okay, we do have some callers. Would you like to testify? Any callers? Hello, would you like to testify on this bill? No response. Next caller. Would you like to testify? No response. Next caller. Hello, would you like to testify? No response. Could you, okay, we have 3 more. Hello, would you like to testify? No response. The next one. Hello, would you like to testify? No response. And this is the last one. Hello, would you like to testify on the Security Deposit Relief Act? Someone else, we're checking with another person. Kristen, did you want to testify? Is that it? Someone named M. Hello? Would you like to testify? No response. Michelle Kennedy, would you like to testify?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is this on the bill for Odette Ramos?
No, this is the Security Deposit Relief
Okay,
Act.
never mind. Mine is just for Odette's bill.
Thank you. Reverend Flowers.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Did you want to testify on the Security Deposit Relief Act?
No, the 21-07.
Thank you.
7R.
Okay. Ulysses Archie.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Are you wanting to testify on the security deposit bill?
On the security deposit bill, is that the bill for the vacation? I mean, for the hearing for the vacant lot? I mean, vacating the lot in Cherry Hill?
No, it's not. Thank you. We'll get back to you.
Okay.
And the last one is Victoria. And the last one is Victoria. Victoria, did you want to speak on the security deposit? No comment? Okay, that's it. Do council members have any final questions on this Security Deposit Relief Act? If not,
I have one. Sorry.
yes, yes, Councilman Glover?
Yes. This is to housing, to Stephanie. Is there a reason why we need to have landlords like identify themselves to us? I know you were saying early on about us having it, for checks and balances, but having landlords register. And what I fear is that if landlords, those that aren't registered, that are renting, I fear that those individuals that are in need of the funds won't be able to get them because of that reason. So is there a reason why you're making that amendment to the bill?
Yeah, that's one of the recommendations that we put forth because we want to make sure that the properties that tenants are renting and occupied are going through this inspection process as required and registered with the city. We don't want to incentivize landlords not to, make sure that they're providing the highest quality of residence for their citizens. So in the fact that these landlords are supposed to be registered, we will help those landlords get registered if in the application process we find that the property has not been registered up to this point. So that was similar to what we did with the rent support temporary rent support program, where when applicants came to us with their landlord and we found that the property hadn't been previously registered, we worked with them to get them to where they needed to be.
And this is Alice. I'm going to jump in and provide another piece of information in addition to what Stephanie just stated, along the lines of that the rental licensing is required by law in order to legally rent a unit to a tenant. And if it is not licensed, then in reality, it cannot be legally rented to that tenant, which also poses issues. So if that tenant cannot take that landlord to rent court or do rent escrow and other items. So we also want to ensure that it's helping to provide the protection that's needed for the tenant in that situation.
No, I clearly understand, Ms. Kennedy. I just wanted to make sure that those landlords that weren't registered, because the tenant don't know if they're registered or not, because at the end of the day, we're worried about the tenant making sure they are having stable housing. I just want to make sure that if the landlord isn't, registered, and you guys are helping to have the landlord registered, that the tenant is not like caught up in the middle and not having, the funds to be able to continue to stay at the location or move to another location.
Can I just also offer Councilman Glover, we have provided rental assistance to 4,000 tenants and not had a single problem with a landlord registering to become a licensed landlord. So that has not been a barrier at all in any of our distribution of funds. Because to get the check for rental assistance, we check and we notify the landlord and the tenant that if the dwelling is licensed or not. If the dwelling is not licensed, we notify the landlord, and then the landlord works with DHCD to get licensed. We have not had to deny a single tenant or landlord back rent because of not having a license. Everyone knows that that is the law. And if they want to receive city funds, then they need to comply. And I just want to echo what Acting Commissioner Alice Kennedy has said. We don't want tenants to get in leases in unlicensed housing, because if that tenant has a dispute with the landlord, they will not be able to further their cause because they're in a dwelling that's not licensed. So they need that standing in order to have protection going forward. So so putting public dollars towards unlicensed units really needs to be thought through very carefully, because it really is to further what we understand to be the council's goal, which is to protect tenants and make sure that they have housing stability, that they are not at risk of predatory landlords. And one of the ways that you protect the tenant is making the landlord comply with the licensing requirements. So I would just ask the council to really weigh that policy decision because it has future implications around protecting tenants if that is a priority of the council.
No, by any means, not by any means. I'm not supporting or pushing the fact that if you are unlicensed, that you still get these funds. I'm just worried about the fact that those that aren't unlicensed, and you're saying that everybody's licensed, so I'm cool with that right now. But I would just make it a point that those that may have not been unlicensed, because I heard Stephanie mention early on that individuals need to be licensed in order to get these monies and things of that nature. And what I'm saying is that a tenant like me, I wouldn't know if my landlord is registered or not. All I know is there's a sign that goes up that says house for rent, renting the property. So I just want to make sure that at the end of the day, that the tenant is not caught up in the middle of trying to stay in the housing. That's it. So
Yeah.
I'm not supporting that, we go another route and give monies to individuals that aren't registered. This is about the tenant. That's all. So I agree with what Stephanie had said early on. Ms. Kennedy kind of backed some things up. So I agree, but it's not one way am I pushing to support that we give funds to unlicensed or registered, unlicensed or unregistered landlords.
All right. Well, thank you, Councilman Glover from the committee. That was a good question. And at this time, as I mentioned, we're going to have a work session with a number of things, with a number of the updates and things that we're going to definitely change with, especially with funding at the top of the list. So this will be, we'll schedule a work session, and this hearing is now recessed. And thank you, Ms. Edwards, for taking the time to add this to your schedule.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Okay, we're now moving on to the second bill, number 21-0078, required real estate disclosures, formerly vacant structures, for the purpose of requiring certain disclosures in order to sell a property that was formerly issued a vacant building notice and providing for certain penalties. This bill was introduced on May 3rd, 2021. The bill was sponsored by Councilmember Ramos, and the committee will now hear from agency reports.
May I say a couple words first as a sponsor?
And, oh, I'm sorry, council member. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members and agencies. This piece of legislation is designed to help a subset of folks that are in my district and across the city that have had an issue with, in this particular case, purchasing a brand new rehab property, but didn't know that it still had a vacant building notice on it. And houses that have vacant building notices on them are technically not supposed to be inhabited. So the violations come, the citations come. Often somebody just purchased a brand new house and didn't see that there wasn't told that that they had their vacant building notice. And all these violations come and they think, oh, it's an error. And I had two constituents who ended up in tax sale because they were getting citations but thought it was an error. And I have another constituent who you'll hear from today that spent thousands and thousands and thousands more dollars to be able to get her house up to code, which should have been up to code to begin with at the purchase of the property. The only way to get rid of a vacant building notice on a property is to get a use and occupancy certificate, which includes several inspections. And so what we're trying to do with this bill and all the amendments is to simply disclose. The seller has to say that there is a vacant building notice on the property. We decided not to try to stop the sales because there are times when owners actually want to buy a vacant building to be able to rehab it. And so it would still have the vacant building notice on it. But what we're saying here is that the seller has to disclose. Now, we know that when the title attorney goes through the lien sheet and they can actually see whether or not there is a vacant building notice on it. This does not always happen, that the title attorneys are actually saying that there's a vacant building notice. So we are saying the sellers absolutely have to disclose that there is still a vacant building notice on it. The amendments from housing, which I agree with, help us to clarify that we're emphasizing that there is a vacant building notice and that the use and occupancy still has to be filed for. My amendment talks about the disclosure language that must be in the contract here in Baltimore City if you're purchasing a house in Baltimore City. So these amendments, I think, complete the entire bill, and I'm looking forward to your support. I will just address one thing that the law department talked about with my disclosure amendment. We wanted in this disclosure for the sellers to initial as well as the buyers to initial, so the buyers know that what they're dealing with. So it was simply for education. And so I do have an amendment drafted that takes out the buyer's initials if that's the way that the committee wants to go with this bill. And so I look forward to the discussion. this is one of two bills that's going to come out around this issue. We are still going to address the issue with the title attorneys, but this is simply a disclosure, and I am grateful to the GBBR, for the Greater Baltimore Board of Realtors, Department of Housing and Community Development, and my constituents for working with us on this bill. And I look forward to your support and answering any questions. And Madam Chair, if I may, one of my constituents is on, and she's on a time crunch because she's going to testify during her lunch hour. Is it all right if she says a statement right now, and then we'll go on to agency reports?
I'd rather do the agency reports first before outside people.
Okay.
Thank you. And we'll start with the city solicitor.
Hi, Madam Chair. This is Hillary Ruley on behalf of the city solicitor. We approved the bill for form and legal sufficiency, and we would approve all of the amendments except for the one that requires the buyer's initials. And the reason for that is this actually does not impact the contract of sale, and it can't. That's really what we have indicated in the bill report this year, and in fact, all the prior disclosure legislation that's in the city code. The city doesn't have the ability to create a private cause of action. It can't impact the buyer and seller's ability to actually transfer the property. It can require the seller to disclose it. And normally what would happen is they'll get a separate disclosure sheet separate from their contract, and that's what the seller is initialing that they gave that over. When you have the buyer acknowledge it, it makes it seem like that's required. And we just don't have the ability to require that. And it won't actually affect the sale of the property if the disclosure isn't made. Because that's just simply local governments don't have the ability to create those private causes of action. We can't give the buyer a reason to rescind, but we can mandate the disclosure. So that's the reason for the law department's analysis there. It's been consistent throughout the past, and it has to do with the Constitution's contracts clause, as well as the fact that local governments in Maryland just don't have that power. But other than that, we can approve the bill, HCD's amendments, the comptroller's amendments, the councilwoman's amendments that are not including the buyer's sign off. And then finally, we proposed one of our own, just to be clear, that this applies only going forward. We would definitely have a contracts clause problem under the Constitution if we were trying to make a law that impacted a transaction that occurred in the past. So at the very end of the law department report, there's a little uncodified section, and I see that MOGR has taken that to legislative reference, and that's a formatted amendment. So we would recommend that as an amendment. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Hillary. The Planning Commission. Do we have someone from the Planning Commission?
Hi,
Nina?
Madam Chair. Yeah, a representative from Planning Commission was not able to attend today's hearing, but they do stand by their report.
Which is favorable.
Correct.
They deferred to, okay, DHCD. Thank you. And Department of Housing, Community Development.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you again, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Stephanie Murdoch, Legislative Liaison for DHCD. Again, I'm joined by Alice Kennedy, Acting Commissioner for the department. DHCD stands by our report in support of this legislation with amendments. As the sponsor mentioned, this is an all too frequent problem in the city of Baltimore, especially for home buyers of recently rehabbed properties who are not aware of an open vacant building notice at the time of purchase and have to go through a sometimes costly and lengthy process to abate the VBN by getting a use and occupancy permit. We have worked very closely with the sponsor to develop friendly amendments that conform the bill language with the existing building code, streamline the language, and also help to protect purchasers of vacant properties. So I'm just going to quickly run through the three technical amendments that we're proposing. The first amendment would delete the word formally throughout the bill. Either a property has a vacant building notice or it doesn't. The second amendment would amend the scope of the section to apply to all real property that has a vacant building notice that remains unabated at the time of sale. So it doesn't matter so much if the building was previously occupied or rehabilitated. What really matters is that it has that active VBN on the property. So this amendment actually expands the scope to really capture a wider group of vacant buildings. The third amendment would require that on or before entering into a contract of sale for any real property, the seller disclose to the buyer in writing whether the vacant building notice was abated by the seller or remains unabated. So DHCD has reviewed the sponsors' amendments as well as other agency amendments, and we are in support of those as well. In addition to informing home purchasers, this bill will help ensure that rehab vacant properties were done so in compliance with the code to protect the health and safety of the new owners. So as I said, DHCD stands by the amendment and passage of this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Stephanie. And now let's hear from the Department of Real Estate. And I see Andy Frank on, and I know that there is someone else from the department as well, Ms. Keller. If you want to elevate her, I don't know who's going to speak on this bill.
And Casey Keller is going to speak on this bill, Madam Chair.
Okay. We're going to elevate her right now.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, thank you for elevating me. Casey Kelleher, Director of Communication for the Office of the Comptroller. I'm joined here, as you saw, with our Department of Real Estate's Acting Director, Andy Frank. The Department of Real Estate stands by our report, favorable if amended. We recognize that this bill would close a loophole that currently exists in Baltimore City Code, and we're fully in support of that. We also want to say that we've reviewed the amendments offered by the sponsor and DHCD. And we initially saw that there should be a clarifying amendment about unabated vacant properties, but we saw that the sponsor has added to the amendment, so I think we're all set. And like I said, we stand by the report, favorable if amended. Thank you.
Could you just kind of explain the amendment?
I would defer to the councilwoman who added it. I think in her amendment she sent yesterday. It was in reference to page 2, lines 6 and 7.
So just for clarification, so you put in an amendment, but are you also accepting, you're saying the councilwoman's, the sponsor's amendment? Is it the same amendment?
It was the same amendment. I saw that she updated her amendments yesterday, so I just wanted to reference it because it was in our vote report. But we are not. We support the councilwoman's amendments in full.
Councilwoman, did you want to explain this particular amendment that she is referencing to, just for clarification for the committee, because we have several amendments?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Basically, what all of these amendments do is sort of play with page 2, letter B in general, to make it very streamlined and clear that we're talking about the vacant building notice. And so the comptroller's, Ms. Kelleher is talking about we're going to be eliminating numbers 2 and number 3 from the bill.
Okay. Can real estate explain this occupancy thing that seems to be a back and forth?
It's no back and forth now. I just wanted to reference it because it was in our initial report. But the bill, we stand by what the councilwoman said. We initially raised a concern about amending language that made it confusing about if a property did not abate a vacancy notice that they would still have to get an occupancy permit, but the Councilwoman's amendments remove the lines that reference an occupancy permit, and DHCD's amendments support that. So that's it.
And if I may, the reason we did that is, again, to minimize confusion. The only way to abate a vacant building notice is to get a use and occupancy. And so what these amendments do is to say the disclosure is very clear that the seller has to say whether or not there is a vacant building notice on it. And so we're just clarifying the language that's in the bill originally, because we didn't have a disclosure in there. So we wanted to make sure that the bill, the new language in the bill matches the disclosure.
Okay. So Hillary, does this clarify, because I know you were having conversation about this occupancy permit.
No, actually, the law department has no concerns about the occupancy. I think the occupancy issue is, just to be clear, that what I believe everyone's concerned about is whether or not there was a vacant building notice, and obviously an occupancy permit would cure any past vacant building problems. So I think it's just a clarification of the language. The disclosure, I think, makes it clear, and my understanding is that the comptroller's office had proposed something that's really now kind of covered by the updated amendment by the councilwoman. So we're fine with that.
So my question is, can we take out all the language of the occupancy permit? Can we take all of that out?
That's what my amendment does.
Okay, that's,
Yes.
I'm just trying to make sure we're all on the same page. Committee, do you have any questions thus far? And hearing none?
I do have one thing I wanted to discuss, which is the law department's suggestion to take out, if you look at the amendment before you, my amendment, it has the buyer's initials on it. And what Ms. Rulli is saying is that if we, so the intent of putting the buyer's initials on the disclosure is that the buyer actually reads it and signs it, that they understand. But what Ms. Rulli is saying is that if we do that, then there's an expectation that some action could happen. Now, what we have in the bill is that if the seller lies and says they didn't, disclose, then they're subject to a fine and they can be sued. So what Ms. Rulli is suggesting is that we take out the buyer's initials from the disclosure so that as not to have that expectation that there can be any further action. And I tend to want to leave it in there, but I understand what Ms. Rulli is saying. I got to go to the General Assembly to make some changes to make sure that there's some, that they can, walk away, but that we want to make sure that the buyer knows that this is what's happening. And so I just want to discuss this with the committee, how you want to handle this. I do have a version drafted of the amendment without the buyer's initials, so that we can, if the committee is ready, can pass that one, depending on how we want to go. I haven't sent it to you because I didn't want to maximize confusion. So, but I do have it in case you want to address it. And we put that in again as an education piece. We already have commitment from GBBR as well as the housing counselors and housing. We're going to do some massive work to educate people about this issue, but we wanted to make sure that there was some acknowledgement. So, so that's why we have the buyer's initials in there in the disclosure. But I wanted the committee to discuss it and feel how you're feeling about it, to discuss either version 6, which I will send you, which doesn't have the buyer's initials, or version 5, which is what you're looking at.
Committee members, any discussion?
I'm here, Councilwoman. I waved my hand. I don't know what else I gotta do. I just have
Councilman Stokes.
I just have a question for Ms. Hillary. You said that actual what Councilman Odette has explained, has to go before the General Assembly. Am I correct? Because we at the city
Yes.
cannot. Okay. And my second.
Yes, and
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh no, that's okay. Go ahead, sir.
No, go ahead. I'm gonna listen to you. You're the expert.
No, I was just going to say that we don't have in the city any ability to allow a buyer to sue a seller. Whether we, whatever we say, the buyer can't sue the seller. If the seller fails to give the disclosure, the seller's subject to the fine or other city recourse. But we don't have any ability to allow the buyer to get a private new cause of action against the seller. We can't we can't create private causes of action for this or anything else. And so the law department's just has noted this in the past with real estate disclosures, because that's always been the goal. Like somehow, if you don't give this disclosure, the buyer's position will change, and it won't. There's nothing wrong with requiring it, and I think obviously all good real estate agents are going to make sure that the disclosures are there in front of the buyer before the sale. But whether the disclosure comes or not likely has no impact on the sale. So, and again, it's going to be sale specific. Each buyer is going to have a different set of facts, and one of those facts might be that the disclosure required by law wasn't there. But the city council can't say failure to give this disclosure means the contract is void or the buyer gets to walk away or whatever it is. So the reason for the notation in the bill, in the law department's bill report is just like it's been in all the other real estate disclosures. We just don't have that power. And so when you put a buyer's signature or signing there to say that they got it, it makes it seem as if that's required, and it isn't. And
so Hillary, so you're saying that this is not written, it's not legally efficient. It's not written legally efficiently, is what I'm hearing.
Well, just
because of the
buyer,
because of the initial piece.
Right. Think about it this way. If you were to be in this transaction and in front of you was a disclosure that had the seller sign off and a disclosure that had the seller and the buyer, it makes it seem as if the buyer is acknowledging that they read it, but we have no control over that. What we have control over is forcing the seller to give the disclosure, and for that disclosure to be truthful and honest, or they suffer, city recourse from the city. But we don't have any ability to affect the buyer's transaction. We can't give the buyer another cause of action. So I would argue we really don't want that signature on there because, imagine the seller gives a truthful disclosure and the buyer refuses to sign it. What then? The law is about forcing the seller to give the disclosure. We really don't have any power over what the buyer does with it. And so, we've said before in other real estate disclosures, you avoid your constitutional problems and your state law problems by simply just putting the onus on the seller to give a truthful disclosure. That's probably the simplest way I can put it.
So, Councilwoman Ramos, you had mentioned another.
Councilwoman, I had another question.
One second. One second, council member. I want to still try to get this particular one handled before we move to another subject. So you had mentioned another amendment that you had. Did that cover this particular initiative?
It does.
So is that one taking this out?
It takes the buyer's initials out.
Okay.
I didn't put it in before you all because of the confusion, but also wanted to have this discussion because I do believe that the buyers in Baltimore City, they do initial all of the Baltimore City disclosures. And so to me, it seems important that the buyer actually sign this thing to acknowledge that they got it and know it. So we just want to, that's sort of where I am on this. I also understand where Ms. Rulli is, that that the buyer can't walk away from the transaction with this particular disclosure. That is something that I need to work on, or we need to work on at the state level. But the fact is that we want to make sure that people understand what's happening when they're buying a house. That's what we're trying to do here with this disclosure.
But the law department is trying to keep our state laws separate from
Exactly.
and it was
Right.
almost a similar, I'm just having now it's almost a similar with some things that happened with the past security deposit bill. We'll now go back with Councilman Stokes and then Councilman Conway.
My next question was about what you just asked her. I wanted to know, was your amendment bill that you talk about leaving out the signature? So we're not going to vote on the one that Ms. Hillary said we don't have the authority to do. And your one that you add, taking the signature out, is that going to be, that's not going to be introduced today, am I correct?
I have it ready for you. If that's what the direction the committee wants to go, I can send it to you right now.
Okay.
And is that your suggestion, Councilman, that we want her to send us this other version?
I mean, I would like to see, I think the committee members would like to see it also. I know she mentioned it. And if she's taking out the signature part and adding that other amendment, then yeah, we should see it.
Please send that to
I'll send it right now.
Jennifer. Send it to Jennifer Coates, and then you have it? We have it, so we'll send it to the committee.
If it's all right with the committee.
Oh, thank you, Councilman. Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, of course, is along this very same line in understanding what the true purpose of the initials are. And I guess the question is more so for Councilwoman Ramos. So if I understand your intention correctly here, the purpose of the initials are not so much to be legally binding, although that would be nice, but more to bring the attention of the buyer to this fact. So if there was a vacant building notice, they would just have the opportunity, after, initialing 100 pages, because that's literally what you're doing, to have this one where you're initialing exactly this point that there is a vacant building notice, regardless of whether or not this could throw out the deal, this could just let them know that there is a vacant building notice. Is that correct?
Correct. And my thinking is also, thank you for that question, also that when realtors know that this disclosure is there, they're going to do their research and say, oh, well, we're going to go look it up in Code Map and see if there's a vacant building notice, so that there's work being done ahead of time, not just at the settlement table. So that, that's the whole purpose of the disclosure, is to, we're going to do this education, but also know they have to look at it and go, oh, there's a disclosure here. Let me make sure for my client, that there isn't a vacant building notice on it. So it would do that work of being proactive, just by having the fact that there is a disclosure in here. And then the work of the point of the actual signature was just, again, to be able to have the buyer acknowledge that they understand what's happening.
Right. And then I guess this follow-up question is for Hillary in the law department. Now, if the intention here is primarily to bring the buyer's attention to the fact that there is a vacant building notice, does it matter whether or not we have the authority to, mess up the contract? Or if we, I guess what I'm trying to ask is if that is the primary goal here, just to bring attention to it, do we really need the state at this point? Although, of course, having the state's backing, changing the state law would be helpful. It would at least bring attention to this, potentially, I think, damning issue to a contract.
That's a great question, and I think perhaps it will help me explain it a little better. You're absolutely right. There's nothing that the city council can do that will change the reality that it doesn't have the power to force this as a required term in the contract such that the buyer could back out if they don't get it. So you're right. I mean, my bill report is academic in that sense. The better way I should have explained it is to say this. Right now, the first reader copy says it is a misdemeanor for anyone to violate this law. So if the buyer doesn't sign it, they go through the transaction, they skip that page, they don't initial it. Now the buyer is at risk. Is that really what you want? I understand the temptation, and believe me, I bought a house, so I know how many darn pages you're signing. And the temptation is that that signature draws attention to it. And it might, and it might not. But the reality is, I mean, let's be real. I don't have to go to my own settlement. I can send a proxy, right? So there's no actual connection between the signature and my knowledge as a buyer, right? It's only, if I read it, if I understood it, right? But when you put it in as a required part of the disclosure, it now does have a legal significance out there. And the biggest that's sort of the easiest to understand is if the buyer fails to sign it, they're in violation of this law. So, they're guilty of the misdemeanor on conviction. So I don't think that's where you want to go. My recommendation would be that the bill be targeted to the seller. The seller has to give the lawful, truthful disclosure at the time of sale. I know it's tempting to say the buyer should sign too, but I actually don't think that's going to help you out because, one, it's not going to guarantee they understand what's going on. It's two, not going to change what the councilwoman rightly said. The real estate agents are the ones that are now going to do the homework on the back end and make sure that the people are aware of this. And three, you don't really want to be in the position of saying, well, actually, I don't know what the legal status of this contract is because the seller initialed it and then the closing happened and then the buyer didn't. So what does that mean? I mean, the buyer got it, but does that mean they didn't read it? Can the buyer get out of this? Can the buyer change the world by not signing it? No, I mean, the reality is whether the buyer signs it or not, it's no different. But it does, under this bill as written, make the buyer subject to a misdemeanor if they fail to sign. So I just didn't think that's really what you wanted to say. And maybe that explains it better.
Committee members, you should have just now received the other amendment that was that Councilwoman Ramos had spoken of. Any other comments about this piece? Once you take a few minutes to look at that, and then while you're doing that, we're going to go ahead and move because we haven't heard from BDC. Baltimore Development Corporation, you're up. Is there a representative from BDC? They do have a favorable report. And no one is here. Oh, wait a minute, we're checking. Ira?
Hi. Apologies, Madam Chair. I think I was moved to an attendee somehow there. But we have reviewed the amendments and we stand by our favorable report.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions on the subject that we were talking about? Let me just kind of review some things here. So,
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Councilman. Dig a little deeper onto the question we were just discussing. Now, so I understand, Hillary, what this would do is if we left in initial lines for both the seller and the buyer, if the buyer didn't initial, then technically they would be breaking the law and they can be fined $1,000.
Yes, that's the same as what you have right now for the seller.
I see.
So I don't think that's really what you wanted to do, because again, if you can't affect the transaction between the two people, you need to go to the General Assembly for that. And all you can do is punish the person who doesn't sign or who doesn't give the correct disclosure. Why would the punishment be on the buyer?
So the next question I have is, who would enforce this and how is it enforced? So would someone enforce this against the buyer?
Well, I mean, the question of enforcement, the penalty here is criminal. So it's like anything else that we put as criminal, it would have to have an investigation and be prosecuted. So I don't think that's a question of city resources. But when you're just looking at it on the face, I didn't think the intent was to penalize the buyer for not initially.
That's right. And I think what I'm asking here is who would penalize the buyer here?
Right.
Who would enforce it against the buyer?
Right. So the question would be, who files the police report, who does the investigation? I think it would be on a case by case basis, but I certainly wouldn't want a situation where the buyer feels like they, that somehow the buyer's failure to initial the document has an impact on them. If they're simply receiving a disclosure, a seller has said it's truthful and this is it, then you're holding the seller to that, not trying to hold the buyer to failing to sign for it.
So, Madam Chair, I have a question about this line of questioning. So if we go into work session instead of taking more time here and amend that last piece saying that it's the seller, because the intent was that the seller would be penalized, it wouldn't be the buyer. That was the intent. So if we, go ahead and amend that to say that it's the, if the seller fails to disclose, then that's where the penalty comes in. Put in the buyer's initials just to make sure that the buyer understands what they're, doing. Does that settle your question?
I mean, that definitely goes a long way, but the question becomes, what's the effect of the buyer not signing it? And there isn't any. I mean, so that's that's a question of what are we really legislating? Because we can't get them out of it. What do we do in a world in which they get the disclosure and it's truthful, but they just either refuse or don't sign it? So it's kind of like, what is that there to do? But yes, that certainly would help, I think, if it's reworded to make it clear. But again, I mean, the whole law is intended to be an onus on the seller.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to say, what happens to the seller that goes to a closing, truthfully discloses that there used to be a building notice, now it's got an occupancy permit. What happens when the buyer doesn't sign it? And so that's what's leaving sort of the hanging out there.
Sure. Understood.
Take away from that. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much. Thanks. So we solved the both issues by taking out the buyer's initials, basically.
Yeah. And in reality, like, I've never met a single person who's read all their disclosures at the sale. I think you're absolutely right, Councilwoman, that it's the real estate agents, once this becomes required of the seller, that is able to do the homework and really put that issue in front of them. Because like you said, there may be some buyers that don't care. They're trying to rehab, so it doesn't matter to them. But and if it matters, then that's something that you've effectuated by forcing this to be at the table.
Right.
Councilwoman Ramos, did your other amendment take out the buyer?
Yes, that's the whole point of the version that Ms. Coates just sent out. The only change to that takes out the buyer's initials. That's all it does.
Which seems to be what the problem is.
Correct.
Your amendment, correct?
Yeah, the version 6 that Ms. Coates just sent out. Yep.
Okay. Does the committee understand that? The second amendment that was sent out takes out the buyer's initials. Okay, so are there any other questions at this point on this bill? So we have several amendments that we're going to kind of go through. But I'm rushing. We do have public testimony. Before we go to that, I do want to recognize Councilman Christopher Burnett that has been here for a while. I apologize for not announcing you earlier, Councilman. We'll start with the public testimony. And we have some raise hands function, people with their raised hands. Is this, Councilwoman, is this the, did you want someone to, you had someone you wanted to speak first before we get into the other?
I appreciate that, Madam Chair. Yeah, Michelle Kennedy, if she's still on, if she could take a couple minutes to describe her situation, that would be great. I do appreciate that.
Michelle, you're unmuted. Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. I just yesterday finished with this 2.5-year process of being in a situation that this bill would tremendously help other people not go through the same situation that I just went through. It also was not a very pleasant experience because I'm not a builder. And I don't know the codes of the city. Trying to get the information that I needed to actually get my use and occupancy was very difficult. Not only did I go through the city being hacked and a pandemic, but there were only about 4 or 5 people throughout my process that were helpful at all at any of the agencies, or a non-builder, or someone that's used to dealing with the city for codes and violations for that matter. Which I'm still working on with Odette Ramos' help. It's very frustrating. The whole realtor piece will be nice, and the education piece will be nice as well, as the person that I purchased the home from was actually a realtor as well. So he knew what he was getting into, and he knew what was happening, but that was not disclosed to me at the time. I did not find that out until the paperwork was submitted and it was now my house. I closed in November of 2018, and I didn't get the notice. And again, I thought I got it in air that following February, and I've been working on this ever since. So I am happy to be finished with this scenario because it has been a nightmare, and I will deal with him on a separate level through his realtor license as well as some other things. But I don't want to bring that into the piece right now. I just want to make it known that this bill would be a tremendous help so that people are aware. If they're not aware of that you need that use permit to be able to live in the property, and also to have the education piece and all of that put in place. I know she's working on that as a separate issue, so that the actual person purchasing the house is familiar with all of that. But to make note as well, just on the level with the city council period, that perhaps somehow, and I don't know how it would happen, that there be some notation that when people call about this particular issue, that there might be someone at each of the departments that someone who is a non-builder can speak to that can walk them through this process so that it doesn't become dragged out for 2 years trying to get with the right people and not people passing the buck. Because that, if I know how to use the internet and I know how to dig things up, but there's a lot of people that don't know that. And it was very frustrating speaking to people as well. I thank you for your time. I do have to go back to work, and I appreciate you allowing me to testify today. And I appreciate you all giving her the opportunity to bring this bill forward.
Yeah. Thank you. And now we'll start with Nika. I know you had your hand. Is this the bill you wanted to speak in? Nanika?
No, I lowered my hand because I'm waiting on the next bill.
Okay. Thanks for your patience. Ari, your hand is up.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, esteemed members of the committee. Ari Plout from Boston Plout Law here on behalf of Greater Baltimore Board of Realtors, GBBR. Just wanted to thank Councilwoman Ramos for reaching out about this issue and allowing us to construct language regarding the disclosure and sharing the amendments. We are agreeable to the amendments that were shared, the DHCD amendments and the original ones. I haven't seen the other ones, but everything we spoke about, we were agreeable to. And we're actually right now in the process of implementing some of these changes in the disclosures in the event that the bill does pass. So just wanted to thank you and appreciate your time.
Thank you. The next person, let's see if there's any other hand raised. Raise your hand if you're testifying for this bill. And I don't see any hand raised. Let's move on to.
Madam Chair, there's Patrick, if Patrick can raise his hand.
Patrick, raise your hand if you want to testify.
I think he's trying to find the raise hand function.
You're unmuted. You're unmuted.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know where my raise hand function is. I'm used to WebEx, but apparently on this one, not used to being an attendee. Anyway, my name is Patrick O'Laughlin. I'm actually an attorney for the state of Maryland. I work at the Office of People's Counsel. We do a lot of public utility regulation, et cetera. So I'm very used to dealing with highly complex, what have you. But I got to say that the permitting process has just been baffling in every kind of way. I bought my house in October of 2018, and we didn't find out about this violation until much later. This bill would go a long way, just like the last person testified said, to preventing this from happening to other people in my situation. Still working on getting through this. It has been a nightmare getting these notifications during a pandemic and not having any real way to navigate through the process. I would implore any of you who are curious, please try going online and figuring out how to apply for a permit. It's an arcane system, and unless you're a contractor, you probably there's a reason why a lot of contractor offices have someone on staff whose sole job is just to do this. It's like speaking a different language. So I would very much encourage this bill to be passed. I think that it goes a long way towards prevention, which, prevention is obviously better than a cure. And I will continue to fight my way through the process. And my deep gratitude towards Odette Ramos for helping me out in this, and to Mary Pat Clark, who tried to help earlier, but because of her retirement, wasn't able to see it all the way through. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next person. Ashley Exposito. Ashley Exposito. No response. Next. Caller, the next caller. No response. Next caller. No response. Next caller, number 4. No response. Next caller, number 5. No response. Next caller, number 7. No response. Next caller, number 9. Number 9. I saw some Exposito.
She wants somebody to read her statement.
We don't have a statement. I'm sorry. You can submit don't forget, you can submit your written statements to the committee. Please send them to Jennifer Coates. Josh Pash. Hello?
Kim Lane.
No response. Kim Lane.
I don't have my hand up.
Kim? Someone, Kimberly? Lila? Lila? No response. Nicole Beckus?
Say for the next 5 weeks, he has to use nunchucks.
Someone is, please mute. Hello, please mute yourself. Oh, Nicole? Stephanie? Stephanie? No response. Ulysses Archie?
Yes, I'm waiting for the next bill.
Thank you. And the last one is Victor? Victoria. Victoria, are you speaking on this bill? No response. Okay, so now, as I mentioned, committee members should have received your amendments. So there's an amendment from the law department, there's amendments from the sponsor, and there's an amendment from DHCD and the Office of Real Estate. So I do notice that the amendment from the Office of Real Estate is incorporated basically one of the same amendments as your amendment, Councilman Ramos. I think it was amendment number 2. Look in the packet, looking at the comptroller's office, that it's the same amendment. So would you agree that it looks like
Yeah, I think what they did was try to take out and a the, and so we just ended up taking out the whole thing. Is that right, Ms. Kelleher? I think you.
Essentially our amendment was in response to the amendment circulated last week to as a conditional amendment, but with yours, we'd no longer need a conditional amendment because it satisfies our purpose.
Okay, so we won't have to vote on the comptroller amendment?
Correct.
Okay, just getting clarification. Any questions thus far from the committee? Okay, we're going to start with the law department's amendment, and that was amendment number 1 on page 2 after line 15, and there was a section they wanted to insert. Is there a motion to move the law department's amendments?
So moved.
So moved by Councilman Ramos. Is there a second?
Second, Conway.
Second, Conway. Middleton, yes. Bullock?
Yes.
Yes. Conway?
Yes.
Dorsey?
Yes.
Yes. Glover? And Glover, Councilman Glover, are you there? Absent. Ramos?
Yes.
Yes. Stokes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. 1 second, I gotta get some extra amendment sheets. And this, so that amendment was approved from the law department. The next amendment we're going to do is from the sponsor, Ramos. And are you going to submit the amendment where we took out the buyer's initials? The one that's it's just posted on the screen, okay.
That's correct. Ms. Coates has the correct one on the screen.
So, do we have a motion to move Councilman Ramos' amendments? This is Amendment 1 and 2.
So move.
Okay. So moved by Stokes, second by Ramos. Chair Middleton, yes. Bullock?
Yes.
Yes. Conway?
Yes.
Yes. Dorsey?
Yes.
Yes. Glover? Absent. Ramos?
Yes.
Yes. Stokes?
Yes.
Yes. These amendments have been approved. 1 second, just making sure they stay in order here. DHCD's amendments. Do I have a motion to move DHCD's amendments?
So moved.
So moved by Ramos.
Second, Conway.
Conway. Middleton, yes. Bullock?
Yes.
Yes. Conway?
Yes.
Yes. Dorsey?
Yes.
Yes. Glover? Absent. Ramos?
Yes.
Yes. And Stokes is a yes. These amendments.
I ain't say yes yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Stokes. Going through the motions. And these amendments were from DHCD. Hold on 1 second. Get putting those in order. And then now the amendments from, oh, that's it. So because the Office of Real Estate was incorporated into Ramos, the sponsors bill. Put that aside. Bear with me. Okay, do I have a motion to move the bill as amended?
So moved.
Second, Conway.
So moved by Ramos, second Conway. Favorable as amended. Chair Middleton, yes. Councilman Bullock?
Yes.
Yes. Councilman Conway?
Yes.
Yes. Councilman Dorsey?
Yes.
Yes. Councilman Glover? Is absent. Councilwoman Ramos?
Yes.
And Councilman Stokes?
Yes.
This bill will move to second reader as amended.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Madam Chair, for going through that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And our next and last bill for today is Bill number 21-0037R, an informational hearing, studying options to rid Baltimore City of vacant properties. for the purpose of inviting representatives from the Baltimore City Law Department, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and the Department of Health to discuss the feasibility of certain specific recommendations to more efficiently and rapidly improve the ability of Baltimore City to remedy vacant dwellings. This bill was introduced on April 5th, 2021. The bill is sponsored by Councilmember Porter. And Councilman Porter, if you would like to say a few words before we begin agency reports.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'd love to. I just wanted to just to share, we've often heard that vacant homes and vacant housing is a hot button issue within our city, yielding over 16,000 vacant properties across the city, which I believe is an undercount. And in a 2019 report indicating there are, the city's actions to reduce the 1,500 officially designated vacant properties over that period, there were an additional 1,300 properties that officially designated as vacant properties over that 8-month period. This bill is intended to convene stakeholders together to really actualize many of the strategies from the mayor's office, from the city council president's office, and also from our housing advocates, along with Councilman and Dr. John Bullock, Councilwoman Odette Ramos, and Councilman James Torrance. This is an opportunity for us to put pen to paper and actually create recommendations and processes within our agencies so that we can move forward to remedy this issue. I would hope that members of the committee, support this particular resolution moving forward and avail themselves not only to establishing recommendations for this particular issue, but also actionalize it within their respective districts as well. As a council person for District 10, particularly within my community development corporations such as Cherry Hill, Westport CEDC, and also Southwest Partnership, we've had significant issues with vacant housing and vacant dwellings, particularly in District 10. And I know that many of my other council members are experiencing them across the city as well. Just as a highlight, as a public health practitioner, we know that vacant homes are sites of dumping illegally, providing stash locations for drug homes and illegal and quasi-safe haven for those who are experiencing homelessness and drug addiction. We need to provide humane housing for residents that are living in Baltimore City, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to develop those recommendations along with agencies, the mayor, and also City Council President. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I will avail it back over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilwoman Porter, for your testimony on your bill. We'll now hear agency reports, and I do want to take note. I think that this was new information I received. So real estate was not referred on the original report, but I think they do have something that they want to submit. So when we'll make sure we get you to speak on that. So I just want to give that to Ms. Keller. So
yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. No problem. We'll start with the city solicitor.
Hello, Madam Chair. This is Hillary Relief from the Law Department. We approve the bill for form and legal sufficiency, the resolution. Note it's a great way to have a conversation on this topic.
Thank you. And that was a favorable report. DHCD with their favorable report.
Yes, thank you again, Madam Chair. Stephanie Murdoch, Legislative Liaison for DHCD, and I'm joined by Acting Commissioner Alice Kennedy. We stand by our bill report in support of this resolution. We are committed to fighting to eliminate vacant properties, which are a hazard to our community's well-being and hindered the neighborhood growth and revitalization of an area. DHCD has multiple tools to address vacant properties, catalyze development, and combat blight. And the use of those tools is guided by our community development framework. Stabilization and demolition are the department's most common tools in ridding the city of vacant properties. In most cases, DHCD will opt to stabilize properties instead of demolishing, them to allow for future development and maintain Baltimore's unique character. However, when necessary, DHCD leverages funding from the state's Project Core to fast-track demolition. In 2020, the city conducted over 1,000 demolitions. Receivership is a code enforcement tool to hold owners of vacant properties accountable and bring properties back to productive reuse. When an owner fails to make their vacant property code compliant by demolishing or rehabilitating, DHCD can utilize the receivership process by which the courts transfer the properties to a third-party receiver. The receiver conducts public auctions where pre-approved bidders bid on properties with intent to bring properties back to productive reuse. Receivership is not a community development tool. It is a blight elimination tool that is appropriate for some privately owned vacant properties. The typical time frame for a property to successfully be transferred to a receiver is about 240 days. And DHCD usually files close to 500 receivership cases a year, although that number was significantly less due to court closures related to COVID. Tax sale is another cost-effective way to obtain title to vacant properties. However, the timeline can be long. Many certificates to vacant properties have a high lien to value ratio and are not purchased by investors at the annual tax sale. In this case, the city becomes the holder of the certificate and can file a foreclosure case to obtain the title to vacant property in the name of the mayor and city council. While this tax sale foreclosure tool is cost-effective way to obtain title to vacant properties, as I mentioned, it can be a lengthy process. DHCD is also careful to consult with communities to avoid affecting long-term homeowners. A new tool that we have to use is the in-ram foreclosure tool that allows the city to pursue tax lien foreclosures and forego the tax sale and certificate system for vacant properties with high liens. The functional application of this legislation is that DHCD may be able to acquire properties for redevelopment and assemble parcels more effectively and efficiently than the current system. We are currently in the process of implementing this bill, and we have filed 3 initial pilot cases for this summer, and we have identified 30 additional properties to foreclose on using this tool. Finally, DHCD has recently implemented City Council Bill 190429, which requires posting owner information on vacant structures. This legislation allows for more transparency by providing public contact information for owners of registered vacant properties, and it empowers communities to hold property owners accountable. Unfortunately, with all of these tools, almost as quickly as we demolish or stabilize a vacant property and return it to productive reuse, another vacant property will appear. The most significant way to address high rates of vacancy is to prevent vacant properties by working with property owners, especially legacy residents, to provide them with the supports they need to maintain their home, pay their bills, and assist with estate planning. Madam Chair, I just went through a summary of some of the tools that we use to address vacant properties. Before I go into any specific questions posed by the resolution, I wanted to turn it over to Acting Commissioner Kennedy just to add a few words.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and members of the council, and the public as well. I want to just make sure that DHCD firmly states our dedication and work to with partners at the table to eliminate blight and address vacant buildings within our communities. We recognize that vacant buildings are not just a physical health hazard to our residents and our communities, but also contribute to mental health as well, especially for our children that have to walk and commute to and from school with vacant buildings. And we are dedicated to finding not just new solutions to address our vacant buildings and the number of vacant buildings within our city, but also addressing and looking for increased efficiencies within the tools that we currently have, and ways that we can productively move and efficiently move vacant buildings back to productive use, whether or not that be for renovation and homeownership outcomes, or whether or not it contributes to demolition for creation of green space within communities as well. So I want to just reiterate this afternoon our commitment to working with members of council, Deputy Mayor Carter, members of the administration, as well as the public and our housing advocates across the city to effectively address this issue, which we know negatively impacts the lives of our residents and the strength of our communities across the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Kennedy. I just also want to thank you for staying strong with all three bills with this time period, because I know you have a very busy schedule, and the committee definitely appreciates your attendance through the whole through this whole hearing process.
Absolutely. Thank you. Stephanie, did you?
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to see if Stephanie wanted to pick up anything after that right now.
I think we're okay for now, and we can go back to committee questions posed in the resolution after the other committees report in, if that's okay with the chair.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll go ahead now and move to the Health Department.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Paul Neber on behalf of the Baltimore City Health Department. We are in support of this resolution. We urge a favorable report, and to kind of echo the sentiments that were brought forth by the bill sponsor. Vacants certainly pose a threat to health. We agree that vacancy affects housing, and housing is a key social determinant of health, in addition to just quality of life standards, such as our neighborhoods and how they're kept up. So when we think of vacancies and all the issues that they could potentially contribute to, we know that they contribute to stress, trauma, and decreases in social capital. This is something that was brought forth in a report by the Urban Institute, specifically the Vacant Property Research Network. And then we also know that there are actual harms inflicted upon our residents due to vacancies. So when we think of asthma, when we think of disease spreading through vermin, these are things that are exacerbated by vacancies. So we are happy to take part in this conversation. We unfortunately don't have a lot of dealings specifically with vacancies. Talking to our environmental health staff folks, they simply haven't had to deal very much out in the field with vacancies. But that said, some of the measures that have been suggested to address vacancies include code enforcement, which is something that we take part in, as well as demolitions, which we've also done quite a bit of as a city. Land banks, which I would like to see more exploration of, and then smart decline planning, which I think is something that has also been undertaken. So with that, again, we urge a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now the Department of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pedro Aponte, Assistant Budget Director on the revenue side. We stand by our report. We recognize the issues that vacant properties have for the city as a whole, and how much tax revenue base we are not converting to revenue due to the large amount of number of properties that are vacant. We don't have a position on the legislation, but we would like to work with the sponsor for any of the initiative, the options they are proposing. Some of them require changes at the state law for implementation, especially on the component of having a different tax rate for vacant property. But again, we will be welcome the opportunity to work with the sponsor and City Council in any possible way to address this issue.
Thank you, Pedro. Appreciate your comments. Do the committee members have any questions thus far?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Could you hold that thought? There was one more. I wanted to make sure real estate, got their comments in.
Sure. I have to leave in just a few minutes, so as soon as I could, I'd love to be able to ask my question. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Real estate, did you, as mentioned, you weren't on the original bill, but you did submit something. You're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we weren't on the original bill, and we didn't have plans to submit anything until we talked with finance about this for an hour and realized we wanted to contribute. So once again, Casey Kelleher, Director of Communication for the Office of the Comptroller. I'm going to speak on behalf of Andy Frank, the Acting Real Estate Director. And if I can't answer any of your questions, then I'll make sure that I follow up with him and you on them. To give some brief remarks about how our office touches vacants. The Department of Real Estate is responsible for approximately 1,300 properties and 1,400 tax sale certificates. We have 3 programs that touch vacants. The first is called the Vendor Lien Program. It's most popular. The properties that are eligible for the Vendor Lien Program start as unsold tax certificates from the May tax sale certificate sale. 6 months after the main tax sale, the unsold tax certificates are assigned to our office, the Department of Real Estate. And then properties that are vacant and have municipal liens that exceed the assessed value of the property are eligible for our program. Under the program, developers can negotiate a reduction in municipal liens in exchange for a commitment to return the property to productive use, which generally means renovating the property for home ownership or rental. Without the reduction liens, the financially upside-down property is not economically feasible to redevelop. Under the program, the purchase of the tax sale certificate pays the greater of the assessed values or the sum of the base taxes and water bill. The second program is a straight sale of a tax sale certificate for the amount of the lien, no negotiated reduction. By far, most of these properties are vacant. The third program I want to touch on before I conclude is what we call our 1,300 or legacy lots. These are addresses, mostly lots, that the city acquired through tax sale in the 80s and 90s. It used to be a city policy to acquire basically all properties through tax sale. We sell these properties directly to people who provide evidence that they will return the property to productive use. The Department of Real Estate is mandated by the charter with responsibility for real estate asset management, and we are committed to working with the City Council on any legislative strategies that help preserve home ownership, fight blight, and strengthen Baltimore's neighborhoods. So once again, I want to thank the committee and especially the bill sponsor for bringing this forward. I'm happy to answer any questions. Sorry, Councilman Dorsey, if I took too long.
Councilman Dorsey, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I happen to, unrelated to having this hearing coming up, I happen to be engaged in a conversation on Twitter earlier about dealing with vacants. So I'm going to ask a question, DHCD. Just on background, I kind of initiated this conversation because of a constituent case that was brought to me just last night where, a house has like 2-foot tall grass and it turns out that the homeowner died in March of 2019, no spouse, no children, no living siblings. And so the house is just completely unattended to. We got into this conversation about receivership and different things. And Ian Duncan, the former Baltimore Sun writer who is now at the Washington Post, I believe, he chimed in and said, a story I never finished, I guess presumably when he was at the Sun, a story I never finished was about how the housing department figured out it could get one of its staffers appointed to resolve estates at the orphans court and try to yank some of these properties loose when there was no will or heirs. Does that make any sense to you? Can you explain what he's saying in that sentence?
Councilman Dorsey, I actually cannot explain to what he's explaining that sentence at this moment, but I will be happy to follow up with you and connect with staff to be able to fully address that statement and question. I can say that one program that we are extremely supportive of, this won't help in this instance with the property that was brought to your attention last night, but we are strong supporters and partners with the Maryland Volunteer Legal Services and the State Department of Housing and Community Development on the My Deed, My Legacy campaign. That was a campaign that was put together in partnership with all three of our agencies to clearly assist residents across our city with the estate planning process. It is a key piece to not only helping to prevent blight, like you just mentioned in the property that was brought to your attention last night, but also it is key for us to be able to assist residents with necessary repairs and so forth to also prevent blight from a repair and prevention standpoint, so that we ensure that the proper residents are on the deed and have the ability to receive assistance for repairs. So while I can't specifically speak at this moment to the orphan court issue that Ian brought up on the Twitter thread, I can say that we are committed to working through the different barriers and hurdles that we are faced when we have a vacant property with no estate, and an estate has to be opened. And we often are able to and have to open estates as part of the receivership process.
Thanks, Alice. I really appreciate it. And I'll just second what you said about Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services. They do a great job in helping people to set up estate planning. If you've never, they've come to my neighborhood association meetings throughout my district over and over again. If you've never seen my high school buddy, John Kern, give a presentation on this, it's far more dynamic than you could ever imagine anybody could give a presentation on this subject. It's a real treat. Yeah, I don't know. In this case, the particular case that was just brought to me last night, I spoke with Steve Homela today, and he said that in this case, there is a will and there was an estate opened here in Baltimore City. So I don't know why this house has stayed in this state and things haven't moved forward. But yeah, estate planning is really critical, and we definitely need to encourage people to do this because death accounts for just so much of the vacancy in the city. So thank you. But I would really like to know if you can get to the bottom of this thing that Ian's bringing up about Orphans Court. That'd be really helpful. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this bill from committee? Hearing none, we'll now take.
Chair?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Councilman Ramos.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Kennedy, thank you very much for everything that you've been doing in our district. There are neighborhoods that have said, no, I don't want receivership to happen in my neighborhood ever again. And that's because we cannot control the outcome of the property in receivership cases. So we need new tools. And I'm curious if the department has been thinking through how to address the problems with receivership. I was the acting director of One House at a Time at some point. I understand the process, and we worked really hard to make it much more streamlined when I was there. But that there are challenges that we're seeing, and that we're not getting to the bottom of the issue of receivership. So I was just kind of wondering if the department has started to think through what to do with that particular issue, if there's improvements to be made there.
So yes, I'd like to start by saying that receivership is one of the tools, and that is specific to abating the vacant building notice. It is a nuisance abatement tool, and it is, not, the process is laid out via law and within the court system. We also want to look at increasing, because we can't control specific outcomes related to receivership because of the nature of that tool. We are evaluating and looking at other tools where we can increase and have better control. So that is one of the things that Stephanie had talked about as it relates to tax sale foreclosure on vacant properties, as well as the in-rem process, and also acquisition as well. We currently do have the capability and we acquire properties privately. One of the issues is that our budget significantly limits the number of properties that we can privately acquire. Looking forward to the fiscal year 22 budget, we have a significant amount of money in for demolition of urgent demolition, emergency demolition, stabilization as well. We are looking to stabilize some properties. But on the acquisition side, we have a limited funding in next year for $250,000 for acquisition for the entire city. So we have a number of different tools, such as acquisition, relocation, acquisition on the private market, not just through condemnation or some of our other items, and funding is a restriction there. As it relates to the receivership process, we are looking at working with one house at a time and doing some analysis with them just on some of the outcomes. I can say at the most recent auction, all of the properties sold at auction, and they ranged in price from $5,000 to $60,000 for the auction properties through one house at a time. One house at a time is responsible for monitoring the construction and outcomes of those properties so that they are not sitting after that. And I know that I do want, and we are having conversations, and we'll be setting up conversations to check in terms of their monitoring process and what those outcomes can be to better that piece in terms of the receivership side.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree that we need to make sure that all of these tools work and that they're well financed in order to make this work. So I'm obviously committed that to you and publicly. You also, the committee should also know, and Madam Chair knows, that the Councilman Torrance and I have been working on another tool to address vacant properties in the form of Baltimore's land bank, which we look forward to introducing in the next few months, and as another way to address vacant properties where we can actually control the outcome. So I think it'll be a great opportunity, and I want to thank the sponsor for bringing this bill so that we can have that discussion about some of the things that are happening in the city and what some of the new possibilities could be. And again, thank you to Commissioner Kennedy for help, for all the work that she has with the tools that she's got so far, and building more tools is extremely important as well. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee.
You're welcome. Any other committee members with questions? We'll now take
Stokes,
Councilman Stokes, you're on.
Do I have to throw a dart at you, Councilwoman? Because you don't see me.
Well, the way my layout is, I don't see you, Councilman.
Yeah, I can tell that. That's definitely right.
You have to use that little button, that little raise hand button.
Look, can I answer?
Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll discuss this after.
Commissioner, I know we talk about the receivership, but I think there's another tool that the community can use, and I don't know if you'd be able to offer that technical training. I always talk about CDCs, Community Development Corporation, and that really helps us in terms of speculators coming in and you don't have control over the receivership, but more of the city kind of property. Would your office be willing to teach some of our community associations, because they can't, that's a heavy lift, how to create their own CDC and then help them create their land disposition agreements with, I mean, that really helps out in terms of neighborhoods that really have a lot of big vacancy problem. And what it does, it has the community or the CDC has more control of where that property goes, and the people that live there would maybe get an opportunity to become homeowners. We're talking about legacy renters. So I didn't know if your office ever looked at that technical training for community associations to help them with their CDC and show them how to create that LDA also with the city housing department.
So, Councilman Stokes, I welcome that question. We are always available to provide technical assistance to any organization across the city, whether or not it be a community, neighborhood organization, community development corporation, nonprofit developer, small developer, minority developer, women-owned developer, land, you name it. We are willing to sit down and provide technical assistance as it relates to the current tools that we have available to dispose of city-owned property and the process involved in that. I think in terms of the land disposition agreement, a land disposition agreement is executed specifically with the entity that is responsible for the financing of and reconstruction of the property, and it's the sale of that property to that entity. So we are more than happy to work with community development corporations that are interested in purchasing city-owned properties and entering into those land disposition agreements with them. We also recognize working with our community associations, CDCs, neighborhood organizations as well, in terms of working towards the outcomes that those communities want to see, which we know that a number of communities have communicated to us that home ownership outcomes are extremely important to them, that stabilization of properties and availability of properties for sale and reuse versus demolition has also come up as a important priority for some of our communities across the city, and we are open and willing to talk with anyone about that. In partnership with the Department of Planning, DHCD is putting together for this next coming fiscal year a kind of a learning network for community development corporations. That is something that we want to be able to provide to them and pull together CDCs across the city. There are a number of new CDCs that have popped up in the last couple of years, as well as we're also doing that with our partnerships with our community land trusts as well, in terms of working through access to city-owned properties and the disposition of those city-owned properties.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the committee? Well,
Yes, Madam Chair.
yes, Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the insight on the front end and certainly discussion here. It kind of got my mind running about a conversation I had recently with Annie Milley of Live Baltimore about the future of the housing market here in the city. I think part of the problem that we've seen with vacant buildings is that no matter how quickly we tear them down or fix them up, we're always falling behind. But also looking into the horizon about what we expect to see, we have a graying population, and I would venture to say, and I have no data to prove this, but that a significant portion of the homeowners in the city are elderly or getting up there in age, and we're very quickly going to be faced with problems that we were just talking about with regard to estate planning. I'm really I'm worried about that, but I also see another major opportunity. We have now millennials now reaching the age in which they are making more money, hopefully better poised to buy homes. I'm really curious if department is really thinking at all about how we can solve one problem with another and meet that hopefully need of folks who may be looking to become homeowners, and maybe stop the loss that we've seen over time. We've seen vacant buildings go from, I think, 12,000 when I first worked for the city to now 16,000. We're still bleeding, and I want to think about what we know to be the problem coming in the future, and if we're thinking about that and how we can be helpful there. It's a difficult question to answer, but if you could talk a little bit about it, that'd be helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Councilman Conway, for the question. So I have had many conversations with Annie Milley, the executive director of Live Baltimore. This is a topic that's actually we are both extremely passionate about, and looking at areas of our city where we have a concentration of older legacy residents, as well as conditions of those properties, conditions of the neighborhoods, and what we can do to strengthen those neighborhoods to attract the younger residents to move in. Northeast Baltimore is an area that we've had a focus on. Communities like Berea is also an area, Edmondson Village, different areas across the city. A number of those communities actually also fall into our middle neighborhoods category, and we are actively working DHCD in partnership with the planning department and Live Baltimore, as well as the school system and many other partners at the table in terms of looking at a strategy for our middle neighborhoods to not only stabilize vacant buildings within those neighborhoods, but put them back into productive use, while also at the same time addressing our legacy homeowners, providing support to them for home repairs, facade improvements, fencing, porches, garages, whether or not it be garage improvements or garage demolition. That's something that comes up often, or tree trimming or things along those lines, to support those legacy homeowners, not only in protecting their generational wealth that they have created over the years that they've been there, but also creating the market that a younger generation would want to see to be able to move into those homes. Some other areas and programs that we're thinking of there are a number of properties in terms of the housing market across the city that are between the $40,000 to kind of $80,000 range, where a legacy homeowner has lived in the property for years. It is well maintained. It might not be the most updated property, but it is well maintained, solid property, might need some cosmetic work and some additional assistance. And we are going to be piloting, we have in the budget next year to be piloting a mortgage program geared specifically to lower income homeowners to purchase those properties, where they will be able to realize lower mortgage costs compared to what they're paying now in rent, which also goes to help stabilize those families, stabilize the community, and create home ownership outcomes. And that is specifically also for looking at renters and home buyers that might need some, not have it be based solely on credit score and income levels and sources of income as well, to be flexible, because that is one thing that we also need for some of our varying different levels of incomes across the city who want to be home buyers, in terms of having incentives available. Our Office of Home Ownership and the home ownership incentives definitely come into play to support a lot of the families that you talked about, in terms of some of the younger generation families wanting to move in and, kind of stabilizing and maintaining those areas of community where we have significant concentration of legacy homeowners. So I hope that helps address some of the question. Like I said, this is an area that we've thought a lot about, and I have some other ideas, and I'm more than happy to probably take another hour just talking about strategy and tactics around this issue and how it combines across so many different pieces and areas of sectors, whether or not it be the real estate market, home health, and our legacy residents, as well as turning renters into homeowners at all different levels of income, and overall community stabilization, the tie and intersection of health and housing, and all the important things.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I have one more thing I just want to touch on. That was really helpful.
Just to let the committee know that I got this notice. We're over our 2-hour time slot, but we can continue for a bit. And I see 3 more hands raised.
Can I just make one more point to put it on the table? It doesn't even have to be answered, but just to be,
go ahead.
I think one of the other issues, and I think we've danced around this a little bit, is of course the estate planning, but then also tingle titles, and digging ourselves out of that hole. So I hope we're thinking about things that we can do internally to improve that process. I think it seems like a bottomless pit. I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the vacants that we know we have are tingle titles. But with that, thank you, Madam Chair.
No problem. Councilman Burnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And sorry about earlier when you were calling on me. I couldn't get my phone to unmute myself, put my camera back on. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
The question I had, and again, this doesn't necessarily need to be answered here, but would be helpful for the council. Acting Commissioner mentioned concerns about resources available to maintain the vacant properties that we have, whether that's like mowing or issues with the structures themselves. I mean, we all get calls a lot about people who may be living next to a vacant property that's collapsing in or impacting their house in some way. Has the agency done an assessment of what the total outstanding maintenance costs would be to, if we were to try and at minimum, making sure that all the vacants are mowed and structurally sound, what that cost would be? Has that kind of assessment been done? And if you have it, could you share it? If not, I'm happy to follow up offline on that. And then I guess overall, what are the estimates to handle the 16,000 overall that we have, as far as whether that's maintenance, demo, et cetera? Do we just sort of know, like, we obviously know that there's a lack of resources, but do we know exactly, how where would we stand in trying to really address this problem as it relates to just, stabilizing or upkeep of the vacants in the city? And again, understand if you don't have it ready, I'm happy to follow up after that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I want to follow up with some more of the figures. We have done some analysis, especially on stabilization of city-owned vacants next to occupied properties, especially as it relates to some of being able to stabilize those with roof repair, et cetera, so that it is not damaging the owner occupied. So I will follow up with you on some of those numbers. In terms of looking at, at this point, currently DHCD in its portfolio, we have around 1,300 city-owned properties in the portfolio. You have to also remember a portion of those are part of our site assembly. So DHCD actively, like I mentioned before, we acquire properties, we hold properties for development, we do site assemblies. So a number of those are tied directly to specific development projects. And then the other properties in terms of looking at what we need to do for maintenance. The 16,000 in terms of being able to address those, whether or not it be through receivership, tax sale foreclosure, acquisition, demolition, et cetera, we are talking in the tens, hundreds of millions of dollars needed to fully address all of those 16,000 if we were to do it at one fell swoop, using all of the tools in the toolbox that we had in order to address those, as well as Councilman Conway came up, just stated too, a number of those 16,000 do have tangled title issues, which can take years to resolve and try to move forward. As the receivership process, we are often having to open estates to handle some of those, but sometimes that involves opening multiple estates and years involved. But when we're looking at the total number in terms of dollars needed across the city, we are talking hundreds of millions of dollars. In alone, there's 25,000, just to give you an idea too, on the prevention side of what we're talking about, there are 25,000 owner-occupied properties where residents have lived in that property or the deed has not transferred in 25 years or more. And we know that when there's that significant amount of time without a deed transfer, that it is a very good possibility that the homeowner is going to be an older adult and a legacy resident. We also know that on average, we're needing repairs done on those properties around $20,000. So just if you take 25,000 and the $20,000, that's a $500 million prop issue in terms of just assisting the owner-occupied legacy homeowners to prevent them and assist them from becoming vacant, while also doing the wraparound services such as My Deed, My Legacy, et cetera. And then it just compounds that number when you look at the 16,000 that are vacant and how to address those. I'll follow up with you on some of the assessment that we've done specifically around the stabilization next to the owner occupied.
Thank you. I look forward to that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can we all get the data?
Yeah, could you send it to the committee and Jennifer will send it out.
And also, I'd like to be included on that as well, Madam Chair. I'm not a member of the committee. Thank you.
You're the sponsor of the bill. You definitely will get it. And you had your hand raised. You're on.
I did. Yeah, thank you so much, Madam Chair. So I had a question related to Acting Director Kennedy. You had mentioned about some revitalization, in particular communities. Can you specifically speak to community revitalization efforts in Districts 7, 9, and 10? We are seeing some of the largest vacant housing in those particular districts that, while I understand that there are, key areas in the city that you're looking to revitalize across the city, those areas have seen significant impact over the last few decades. And so I would assume that, your agency is kind of looking at those respective districts. So this is just an opportunity. If you could share what you're doing in those specific districts, that would be great. Thank you.
So
let's take that a step further and with all of the 14 districts.
Absolutely. So the Department of Housing and Community Development has a number of different ways that we're looking at community revitalization across the entire city in all 14 districts. We do know that there is and are some districts with a higher concentration of vacant properties than others. We have definitely Councilwoman Porter in 6, 7, 9, 10, we do have a high concentration of vacants looking across those. And some of the tools that we're using in those districts are the same as we're using in districts across the city. So our impact investment areas are a key area of focus as it relates to our community revitalization. We've been working within those impact investment areas with work groups at the block level, doing block level planning and analyzing block by block what the condition is on a block and where does that fall in terms of priorities and building off of strengths located within that block, whether or not that be addressing that block for either demolition or stabilization or if there's a city-owned property within there, what can we do to move that to a developer to work on that block, as well as addressing legacy homeowners, and not just legacy homeowners, but just homeowners on that block with any needs that they have in terms of being able to maintain their properties as well. This is an intensive approach, but we are doing that within the impact investment areas as well as with other community members that have reached out and community organizations. We will go through and talk to them specifically about the tools that we currently have and how to utilize those tools within their communities. This is also a focus. A number of the districts that you mentioned also do have, while high levels of vacancy, they also do have areas of middle neighborhoods and potential there with our middle neighborhood strategy, as well as looking at how to address community revitalization. I think of it as a holistic approach. If we are doing this piecemeal and only focusing on demolition of properties without looking at prevention of that blight, we will continue to not be able to get ahead of the game and continue to have and see an increase. So for however many vacant properties we put back into productive use, we will have just as many, if not more, coming on and potentially, like I said, just never get ahead of it. So prevention is a priority for us, and as well as we do have a sense of urgency around this issue. This is something that we're actively looking at, where the agency is completing a process improvement study right now for the disposition of properties. And, I've asked some questions of staff in terms of in the time that I've been in the acting role, what is the timeline? How does this look? So we have it, workflow. We're taking it down to the days.
Wonderful.
How can we, shorten those days? So we're looking at it from all different areas and also recognize the sense of urgency, because as I stated in the opening remarks, this isn't just about the physical structures of the vacancies and the blight that are in our community, but it's about the people and the residents that live next to the vacant structures and in the community where the vacant buildings are, and the impact that the vacancy has on their health and well-being. And the intersection of health and housing, and also the impact that the vacancy has on our crime across the city, and also reduction in our violent crime and violence reduction strategies, and reduction in lead paint. It is all connected, and we have a sense of urgency and are willing, like I said, to work with everybody to address this.
Thank you so much, Director Kennedy. Madam Chair, I have one more question, if possible.
Sure.
Thank you. Acting Director Kennedy, with regard to the impact improvement areas that you mentioned, can you speak to the criteria for designating those impact areas? One of the things that I'm really concerned about, viewing some of the strategies online and looking at the impact improvement areas, I'm not seeing a correlation between the equitable distribution of resources and those that have the most need with the improvement areas identified from DHCD. So if you can speak to that, and if it's a follow-up, that's perfectly fine. I just wanted to put that on the table so that we can begin to have that conversation.
So I can speak to that, the impact investment areas were evaluated based on areas of need with historic disinvestment, as well as areas where we could leverage resources and also additional successes and wins that are within those areas. In terms of other deep dives, that was, those were worked on and evaluated and chosen several years ago, and kind of recently announced with the community development framework when that was put forth in 2018 and 2019. And I can say that while the impact investment areas exist as an area of focus, which did take in consideration areas of disinvestment, where we can leverage success, where we can leverage funding and other resources across federal, state, and philanthropic and private investment. We do recognize that it is difficult because it doesn't hit on every neighborhood that we have and every community that we have in the city that has negatively been impacted and has a history of disinvestment. So we do recognize that, and we are always willing to work with every community. So what I've said with a number of communities, some of them which are in your district as well, with Cherry Hill and Westport, we're still having, conversations with the Westport Community Development Corporation or the Cherry Hill Community Development Corporation or other neighborhood organizations to talk through some of the same tools that we have. So if they do have an interest in addressing vacancy and doing receivership and tax sale, we still have those same conversations, and we still look at what resources we can bring to the table to assist those communities.
Thank you so much, Director Kennedy. There you are, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Commissioner Kennedy, I did notice that the planning department was not a part of this discussion as well. And as you're talking about the different communities, a number of communities throughout our city continue to update their master plan, and which is so important, especially because of the vacants in all these different communities. Do you keep a copy yourself of your office of the master plans? That's such a vital instrument at knowing what the community wants to do with some of the vacants.
I'll say that, and Chris, I believe that Director Ryer would fully stand behind the statement, which is that DHCD and Planning Department are in lockstep with our efforts. We communicate on a regular basis. Our staff on the development side, our neighborhood development officers, work hand in hand with the comprehensive community planners and evaluate the plans, neighborhood plans, master plans that are being reviewed. And they're part of the process as well with co-convening the impact investment area work groups, as well as so many other meetings that we have when we're talking neighborhood level planning. So we do keep aware of any updates to those plans and work in tandem with planning so that we're all on the same page and not having to duplicate efforts, and also finding areas where there's synergy and collaboration for us to impact change as best as we can.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee or council members? Hearing none, we're now going to move on to public testimony. And I know Nika has been waiting patiently as the first one to kind of take off with that. I do want to also remind the public that you can submit written testimony to the committee or the sponsor. And we did have one person, Miss, forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, Espadazo. I think she did, we did submit her testimony to the committee and also to the sponsor. And,
Yes, Madam Chair.
that will be a matter of record. So I just wanted to say that publicly. And we'll start with the hand raise functions. And Nanika, you're on.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Nika Namdi. I'm the Director of Community Development for the Living Well Center for Social and Economic Vibrancy, the creator of Fight Blight Be More, and a co-creator of the Stop Oppressive Seizures Fund. We already know, you already know enough, so do I. It is not the knowledge we lack. What's missing is the courage to understand what we know and to draw conclusions. This quote from Swint Lindquist in Exterminate the Brute sums up the necessity for City Council Bill 210037R, an informational hearing for studying options to rid the city of Baltimore vacant properties. Its stated aim is to discuss the feasibility of certain specific recommendations to move more efficiently and rapidly to improve the ability of the city of Baltimore to remedy vacant dwellings. What is known? The city's own laws, policies, and practices, together with those of the state and federal government, from ground rent to Ordinance 610 to disinvesting in Black neighborhoods to overfunding the police while underfunding schools, are major contributors to the vacancy in Baltimore. Any effort to address vacancy that does not aim to repair the damage done to residents and communities victimized by the city's own actions will neither be equitable, just, or sustainable. What is understood? The time for wrapping smallpox soaked bandages on burn victims actually never existed. Yet that is what the city has been doing in the Black Butterfly to try to cover up its own participation in making our villages vacant in order to facilitate poverty profiteering and neo-urban colonialism. The scope and scale of vacancy in the city, which is just one form of blight that we are facing, will not be fixed with more of the same punitive measures that will never be fully applied to those who have conspired with local, state, and federal government to displace Black communities for now a third time. First out of Africa, second out of the Deep South, and now out of the city. Where is the courage to draw conclusions? That courage is right here. The recommendations included in this document addresses the city's ability to remedy vacant properties that requires centering healing the people, communities, and institutions harmed. Focusing on efficiency and speed measures alone will not address the root causes. And we know that those measures are rooted in plantation economics anyway. The following recommendations for improving the city's ability to address the vacancy problem center the health and wellness of communities without regard for respectability politics, harm reduction and repair, land sovereignty, food and water justice, housing security, and sustainability. There are about 20 of these. I'll only cover the top few. Create Baltimore Neighborhood Reparations Fund and Social Equity Bond. Create and apply a measure to balance nonprofit property tax exemption against lost property tax revenues. Ensure every property with meter water is receiving an accurate bill and develop a real dispute resolution program. Abolish tax sale for owner-occupied units. We know this is a state, this requires state legislation, but the city should be about this business. Ramp up in-rem foreclosure, using a new land bank for equitable distribution of properties. Fully implement the state waiver of estate administration fees for low-income households, and develop a policy to return funds or callback clauses on failed developments using taxpayer dollars. This list of recommended policy programs and practices to address vacancy is holistic and innovative. Taking this integrated approach to addressing vacancy will disrupt the pattern of city actions that produce little change while often creating or worsening complex and compound trauma experienced living in neighborhoods with concentrations of vacancy or blight. For example, if a vacancy tax is going to be enacted, it must include an heirs exemption. This exemption would cover heirs properties and those with tangled titles. It will protect generational wealth transfer and community continuity while allowing the legislation to address vacancy and blight supported by speculators and predatory investors. I know there are those who are listening who really only care about the numbers, and those folks should consider that more than $80 million to the city in revenue is lost annually in direct cost of vacancy and in lost property taxes. Then there are millions more spent in indirect costs like the $84 million collected by local hospitals from 2013 to 2015 for treating asthma cases, which are 3 times the state average in neighborhoods with vacancy rates of 30% or more. Vacancy is bad for the city's bottom line, for real, for real. It's time to dismantle the structures and systems that support and enable vacancy. These recommendations are a platform for starting. I did submit this testimony in total to Councilperson's Porter's office, and I'm hoping that it will be entered into the official record.
Thank you, Nikki, for that powerful testimony. And some of those things that you had mentioned, I think we're most of us are on the same page. One suggestion I would suggest, maybe sit down with the sponsor of the bill, Councilwoman Porter, and maybe set up a meeting with housing, real estate, and finance with some of your great suggestions. And I'm just kind of throwing that out there as an added recommendation. So thank you so much for your testimony. And you waiting through the very end. Going down the list with the hands raised, Bree Jones.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're on. 2 minutes.
All right. I want to thank Councilwoman Porter for introducing this bill, and I am in favor. There are 3 overwhelming challenges that I face as an equitable developer working in one of the most distressed neighborhoods with the highest rate of vacancy and abandonment in the city. And the first is acquisition. Vacant properties are often tangled and buried in lien and legal hurdles. The second is the appraisal gap, making the capital stack complete because of these hurdles. And then the third is that ensuring that development efforts do not cause gentrification and displacement in our community. And that's what I would like my testimony today to focus on. I urge the committee and the research team to examine the social implications of returning housing stock to productive use to ensure that we are putting in place preventative measures to prevent displacement and housing instability. Vacants in the Black Butterfly aren't happenstance. As you all know, they are the result of decades of redlining, urban renewal, contract lending, block busting, the war on poverty, and the war on drugs. So it's important that we don't simply focus on the tools and tactics for dealing with vacants, but also that we center from the onset the outcomes of populations that have been harmed the most and have borne the greatest burden from vacant properties. And we must work to ensure that they receive direct and intentional economic benefit from vacants that are brought back to productive use. For example, it's important that vacants assembled are not simply sold to the highest bidder. That's a surefire way for Baltimore City to continue to cause harm in Black communities. We must create pathways for renters in neighborhoods plagued with vacants to actually own those vacants affordably and create a racial equity bond, like my colleague Nika Namdi often advocates for, to facilitate the affordable purchase of these newly constructed and newly renovated, formerly vacant buildings. We need to have disposition requirements that score more favorably mission-driven housing developers and have clawback provisions if awardees of properties do not actually develop those properties within 12 to 24 months. In closing, one of my favorite quotes is, "The antidote to poverty is not wealth, it's justice." And in a similar vein, the antidote to vacancy and disinvestment is not investment, it's reparation. And so I urge the committee that will form around this vacant research to include considerations for operational support for mission-driven and community-led organizations like the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services and the Stop Oppressive Seizures Fund and other housing advocates to ensure that as Baltimore begins to wrangle its vacant issue, it's designed as a tool for justice as opposed to simply an economic tool for gentrification. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Peter Duval. 2 minutes, please.
First of all, I want to thank the sponsors for bringing this bill forward. It's very useful to discuss these issues with the City Council. Just wanted to point out that the results from the last One House at a Time auction are symptomatic of the very, very strong market for vacant shells in Baltimore. I sometimes get a feeling from city officials that they're negative. I had one tell me that no one really wanted to live in Baltimore, so moving more vacant houses really wasn't a good idea because it would just flood the market. What I see out there, the very strong auction results, I see just the opposite. And I think we end the use of all the tools. I think there's a lack of capacity within DHCD to actually expand their use of tools. And I just really think I think they need more people to do the work from what I've seen. And again, I'd want to point out, and it's already been pointed out, that dealing with the vacant house problem is a moneymaker for Baltimore City. It's not a money loser. And I don't believe that, given the strong housing market, it would cost quite as much as some people in the housing department think it would cost to at least greatly resolve the problem. Thank you for listening to me. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Kim Lane, and please use your raise hand function if you want to testify.
Hi, my name is Kim Lane, and I'm the director at Pigtown Main Street. So just wanted to say thank you for the bill, and we support it. And add that I also hope while we're examining vacancy in residential, that we start to really look also at vacancy on commercial strips. Because many times it's a first floor vacant, right? Above that is affordable, could be affordable rental apartments. And, you know, the commercial corridors are the front door, and we really have no tools to hold commercial property owners accountable, right? So when your front door shows vacancy, that starts to create an impact in the neighborhood. And we have no tools right now to hold those commercial property owners accountable. They just have to throw up a sign, and sometimes not even that. And I also just want to thank Acting Commissioner Kennedy for continuing the work in the Southwest area in the community development framework. It's been strategic. It's great to be able to work with all the agencies, all the other neighborhoods in Southwest around strategies. And although I guess it's got controversial, I'm going to say the pilot project that we were starting to work on, we were recommending folks to the pilot project in Southwest Baltimore, because Pigtown is part of that. The beauty of that is we could vet developers. So a lot of people who are interested in those properties were people who lived in Southwest Baltimore and wanted to renovate 2 or 3 houses in their neighborhood on a block that'd been vacant forever. And it was a pilot project that I feel in 20 years of community development experience in Baltimore had real promise. And knowing who those people were that were being vetted, these weren't and who would have bought those properties at tax sale or receivership, who will buy them without vetted developers. We know who's going to buy them. It's the problem property owners that we have problems with all the time. They'll sit for years until they think they can do something with them. So I wanted to say that, thank you. I hope we can look at more alternatives like that, because that showed real promise to pilot it. And especially because we could vet developers and really know who is getting the properties and work with them to bring in subsidy for affordable home ownership to rehab. And also just to, please, let's try to look at commercial vacancies as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ayu Trung? Hello?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm calling the next person.
Her name is Hugh. It's pronounced Hugh.
Hugh Trump.
Yep.
My apologies. Hello, are you there? Hello? Moving on to the next person. It's like there might be some technical difficulties there. Moving on to the next person, Lisa Hodges. Hi, Lisa.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Middleton, Councilmember Porter, members of City Council, city staff, and members of the public. In my capacity as Executive Director of the Westport Community Economic Development Corporation, I serve the communities of Westport, Lakeland, Mount Winans, and St. Paul through our Harbor West Collaborative Initiative and Community Land Trust. The biggest millstone around the neck of community development in our neighborhoods is absentee vacant property owners who have bought and held properties particularly in Westport, some for over a decade. Of the 2,151 residential units we have in our statistical neighborhood area, approximately 7.2 were vacant as of 2019. This does not include properties that appear to be residential along Annapolis Road corridor, but are zoned commercial. We also have vacant commercial properties as well. The vast majority of these vacant units are in Westport's commercial corridor, the largest property owner being HC LLC or HC Baltimore LLC, whose principal owner is David Baird of Virginia, a super predator in the world of community development. This company is not only buying vacant properties and not improving them through their agent, Jody Buck, with Cummings and Company Realtors, they are aggressively continuing to purchase properties. Their activity not only undermines our work to acquire and rehab these vacant properties in Harbor West, but it also makes it more difficult to finance the acquisition and renovation of these vacant units. Funders ask us for the market information for our neighborhoods, which includes the number and condition of vacant units, to assess whether or not our project is a good investment. Too many vacants, too much risk, no construction loan. In any other world, Westport's light rail stop, proximity to the waterfront, proximity to downtown and the casino, proximity to 295 and I-95 would make it very attractive to our lenders. However, the volume and age of vacants, some with vacant building notices from 2009, gives our lenders heartburn. Even with the coming waterfront project, we have a heavier lift than we should to secure funding. Some of these units may never make it to market because it is less expensive for the owners to pay the taxes and keep the properties secure than make the necessary improvements and place them in service. The sickness of vacancy has invaded Mount Winans and Lakeland as well. There's a growing number of vacants in Lakeland along the walking path to the school. We fear the landlords have watched the success of HC LLC in Westport and are replicating the model. This must end. The solution we offer is twofold: making it difficult to buy and hold by increasing the property registration fee for vacant homes, and making it easier for community development corporations to acquire properties through bulk tax sale. We propose increasing the property registration fee for those units with vacant building notices over 2 years from $30 a year to $3,000 a year. This fee should be increased by 10% every year that the unit is not placed in service with a certificate of occupancy. The escalating fee would incentivize owners of vacant units to either sell them or improve them. We have presented this idea to senior staff at DHCD, and they have given no regulatory or legal reason why this is not possible. The response from one staffer was that if the property owners could afford to improve them, they would, which, with all due respect, is patently false. HC LLC can afford to improve the properties they own, or they wouldn't be acquiring more. They currently own over 37 vacant homes. We made offers on 11 of those properties at their acquisition cost.
Sorry, time to wrap up.
Okay. The second recommendation is that there needs to be better communication between DHCD and Comptroller's Office regarding the special tax sale process. And we yield.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. And just a reminder for everyone, you can submit your testimony to our bill file. Please email jennifer.coates@baltimorecity.gov. And let's go back to Hugh. Let me try her again. Are you there, Hugh?
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, 2 minutes.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and to everyone on the committee, and thank you to Councilwoman Porter for introducing this bill and initiating this conversation. My name is Hugh Trung. I am the Baltimore organizer for the Community Development Network of Maryland. Our Baltimore City members, known as the Baltimore Equitable Community Development Network, represent more than 40 community-based nonprofits, mission-based developers, and community development professionals. And I'm very pleased to hear their voices on today's call. I want to acknowledge them and thank them for joining. And first of all, we do agree with what they've shared. I also want to emphasize in my testimony today that the strategies that the city is currently using to address vacant properties are inadequate, and it is for many reasons. But the biggest one is that the scale at which they are funded and deployed does not meet the size of the problem. I know other people have mentioned this, but I wanted to emphasize that again. And because they do not meet that scale, they perpetuate disinvestment, crime, and poor health in the communities, all of them Black, that have the highest concentration of vacant properties and continue to experience multiple levels of historic and ongoing racism. As you consider new strategies, whether it's a land bank, new fees, or even a racial equity bond, as my fellow advocates have mentioned, I ask you to consider, one, again, tools are only effective when city agencies and entities have the resources to implement them. So I did notice that in Acting Commissioner Kennedy's report and testimony, she mentioned a plan to increase filings and begin using additional additional tools such as interim foreclosure. Some of the receivership filings that was proposed were to a level of 700 to 800 filings a year. We are a city with over 16,000 vacants. That level of usage, including interim foreclosure, we're looking at 1 to 2 decades of work to tackle this problem. And I asked the council, is that an acceptable timeline to this council and to our neighbors, for our neighbors' health? How much more could be done if we invested 2 to 3 times more that level of resources? Another item I wanted to emphasize is the role of the court system, particularly the District Court of Maryland, in acquiring and processing properties. I urge you to reach out to the District Court to understand what can be done on their end to streamline the process for their staff. They're a major player in terms of clearing properties through liens, getting title, even the whole process of receivership. And they are working through a backlog even prior to the COVID pandemic because of the 2019 hack of Baltimore City government, as I'm sure many folks here remember. And we can only assume that's gotten worse due to court closures due to the pandemic. So I strongly urge the council to, as they consider this issue, to consider the role of the courts and working with the court system to deal with the systemic issues. We do agree that there should be increased financial consequences being a neglectful owner of vacant property. However, we're concerned that some of the motivations, particularly of bad actors, the motivations that lead to this neglect may make them apathetic to any additional fines or taxes on their property, and that these increased taxes and fees may complicate the eventual acquisition, disposition of these properties for community-driven purposes. So, not to say that's a obstacle that can't be overcome.
Sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right. Thank you. Finally, transparency is key. We ask that whatever the council and the agencies decide on, make it clear and accessible for our neighbors and fellow residents. In this day and age, it shouldn't be a big question. And I know the Kansas City is taking steps for neighbors and residents of these properties to understand what is going on and to know that the city actually has a plan on them. They're just not leaving them in the lurch. Thank you all for your time, and I yield the remainder.
Thank you. Archie, Ulysses Archie?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, 2 minutes, please.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Ulysses Archie, and thank you, Sharon Middleton, as well as the Councilman Porter and my councilperson, Christopher Burnett, and all the other council members on the committee. My name is Ulysses Archie, and I am a master trainer for adverse childhood experiences for the state of Maryland, and I have gone all across Maryland and have been curious about the groups that are already in possession of property and land and that are doing good work are being dispossessed of that land, namely in the Cherry Hill section of Baltimore Black Yield Institute. And I think that that needs to be entered into the conversation and also supported with what is going on in the community. I think also that this property, we were talking about vacant buildings, but we weren't talking about green space, and also the role that HUD plays in this work, and how someone can be dispossessed of land that is doing positive and good work based on something that I haven't been able to find, nor have my friends been able to find in public record. So I yield my time to the rest.
Thank you for your testimony. Shanae Roth?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Shana Roth Gormley. I'm an attorney at Community Law Center, and I echo everything that everyone has said, really important points, particularly about the need for increased resources for city agencies to address vacancy. And there are a couple other things I just wanted to emphasize. The first is the impact of tax sale on vacant properties. And as DHCD said in their testimony, the most significant way to address high rates of vacancy is to prevent future vacant properties. Tax sale is right now a cause of vacancy. Homeowners can lose their homes in tax sale for as little as $750 in unpaid taxes and other liens. It's a confusing system to navigate. Even as an attorney, I'm having to constantly look things up, ask other advocates, how to approach particular issues. Seniors are particularly vulnerable, especially if they've already paid off the mortgage, and it's an equity issue. The Pro Bono Resource Center and Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service tax sale prevention clinics are reporting that 85% of their clients are Black, 72% are seniors, 48% are disabled, and 72% have annual household incomes of less than $30,000. And then for properties that are vacant, that are already in tax sale, they're continuing to accumulate liens, to accumulate other taxes on their properties. And they are just cycling through tax sale year after year. So we've seen that that's not an effective tool for addressing vacancy, and I'm looking forward to seeing the in rem foreclosure tool go forward. But again, we need more resources to address that. And then the second thing I wanted to bring up is the count of vacant properties. There are, when I looked it up the other day, just over 15,000 properties listed as having vacant building notices in the city. But within recent years, the census has counted over 46,000 vacant dwelling units. Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance has estimated over 30,000 vacant properties based on city and census data. So I'm concerned that we're not even getting an accurate picture of the scale of the problem. So I hope that's something that will also be considered, that we need to have an idea of what we're dealing with so we can truly address it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. And now we're moving to callers. Caller 12, I think we have 6 callers. Caller number 12, we'll start with you. Hello. Caller 12, no response. Next. Caller number 3. Caller 3, no response. Caller number 4. Caller 4, no response. Caller 9. Caller number 9, no response. Kimberly? Kimberly? No response. And the last one is Victoria.
I have a question.
Are you Victoria?
Yes.
Okay. Recognize you. And who are you with?
Oh, I'm just I guess a resident. Just had a
Okay.
question.
Go ahead.
Neighborhood close to where there's a lot of vacancies, like the Edmondson Village area. I was just wondering, will there be a plan maybe to implement the dollar housing again, where some investors can come in for that and then build the properties, I guess, with someone making sure that they do exactly what they say. But will that be considered?
So you can contact the housing and they can explain about dollar housing. This is really for testimony and not, a back and forth answering. But the commissioner did put her email information is in the chat, so I'm sure that someone can give you you can have a nice dialogue with someone on the rules and specifics about dollar housing. Will that be helpful?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is that it? I think that's it with the public testimony. Do committee members have any further questions or the sponsor have any final words before we take a vote?
Yes, ma'am. I just want to thank you, Madam Chair, for facilitating this discussion, and I look forward to additional conversations with community members, Acting Director Kennedy, and those from DHCD and other entities and agencies involved. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you for introducing this hearing. Housing is a very important piece for positive movement in our city, and I'm sure everyone got some good information. Is there a motion to move the bill?
So moved.
So moved by Councilwoman Ramos. Do I have a second? Second by Conway. Chair Middleton, yes. Councilman Bullock?
Yes.
Yes. Councilman Conway?
Yes.
Yes. Councilman Dorsey? Councilman Dorsey is absent. Councilman Glover is absent. Councilwoman Ramos?
Yes.
Yes. And Councilman Stokes?
Yes.
Yes. This bill will move to second reader at the next council meeting. And thank you all for attending, giving your feedback on all 3 bills. And this hearing is now adjourned. Keep cool.